Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Build the Weight Loss Practice of Your Dreams. I have someone terrific today who's going to talk about a topic that I get asked about all the time, and that's really how you can create a stable and self-directed team in uncertain times. Now, the uncertain times perhaps wasn't always one of those requests, but nowadays it really is. So I have Shelley Smith, who is the founder and CEO of Premier Rapport, and she is basically, as far as I'm concerned, the queen of everything related to company culture and building that dream team and making your business, your practice in our case, work really, really well for you, your team, and most of all, your patients. So we're going to get right to it with Shelley, and I'm going to have her tell a little bit about herself, and then I've got some really specific questions for her and some great ones that came in from members of Bariatric Business Boss. So, Shelley, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Carol, for having me on today. And I get some of those same questions and comments as well. And it's interesting, they're coming even more fast and furious these days as we continue to pivot, bob, and weave on the daily or by the hour. So I appreciate being on today. And hopefully between the two of us kind of going back and forth, we're going to give your folks, your viewers, your members some additional things to kind of think through and process. So I got into this obsession. I'm beyond passionate, but this obsession about workplace wellness. Sorry, I was thinking about you guys, about workplace culture. I've been doing it deliberately for 12 years. I'll say accidentally for almost 35 years before it was called, workplace culture and this engagement and really understanding how do we tap into the talent that we possess and everybody around us for those dream teams. And so I've had the pleasure now of working with all kinds of different individuals from, startups and one-person shops into the multi-thousand employee shops. And I love to do it, especially when people get that the foundation is the culture. So.
Right, because I think sometimes people think that a dream team is unattainable and it's some sort of, but it really is attainable. I know in our practice, I truly have a dream team, but it doesn't come just by accident. It comes through deliberate action. So I know you're really helpful in terms of creating those sorts of cultures in businesses. So what we're talking about today is almost like two different topics because it's being stable, having a stable team and also a self-directed team, but they really kind of play together. And I wanted some of your key tips that you share when you go into corporations to help create that in their business, and specifically here for physician practices. What are some of your top tips and strategies that really make this a reality for people?
Well, the first thing is you have to understand, where are you now? So first, there's a little bit of an analysis. And when you talk about dream teams, ironically enough, I think you guys, I know Carol, one of my favorite tools is Predictive Index. Mm-hmm. And they actually are doing something now, and they're calling it Dream Team. So funny enough that you should mention that. But inside of that piece is, first we've got to understand, high level, our mission, vision, values. And from there, what is it that we need inside of our practice in order to create that stable dream team? So with that, we've got to understand, there's like 4 sections of a dream team. It's the innovative kind of quadrant inside of that. And then it's the dashboard results driven. And then it's the processors and the experience. So where are you in your practice with what you're trying to achieve? And then overlaying, where are each of your team members? And then you see your gaps and your fits. And then you move into strategies of what else do you need to do to create the stabilization for your dream team. So that's step 1, is where are we in each of those quadrants? Mm-hmm. And then we come back and go, okay, where else do we want to go? Or where else can I always say, level up? And then we begin to unpack it and put together some game plans.
So I know in my experience, and I imagine when you work with corporations, some of that has to do with, sometimes we get tied into the fact that we hire someone for a particular role and we just think of them for that role. But what you're talking about really is maximizing the talents of your entire team, which probably goes beyond their specific role they might have been hired for.
Sometimes, what we often find are the nuggets inside of each of our team members, because you're right. We hire them for, the front office reception. We hire them specifically for the pre assessments when people are coming in. We hire them for the variety of reasons. But when we take a deeper intentional dive into where their hardwiring matches the job description, and then it's like, well, what else could they do inside of that position that makes them feel additionally seen, valued, and heard, which gives the engagement, which creates the stabilization, which creates the dream team itself. So one of our friends and colleagues, Kathy Eckhart, talks about the zone of genius. And so I think about that when I think about, we all have things that we really love to do, and we're naturally hardwired, either, the detail, the innovation, the results, or the experience. And so we bring that to the job that we're hired for. But like, what else inside of that are we as owners asking the staff to go, well, what else can you do around process? What else can you do around, ideation? What else can you do to bring the experience of the patients? So we tend to stop with, here's your job. Yeah. And if you do that, I'm like super happy that you show up and that you do that. But again, the stabilization and the maximization of the dream team comes into, well, what else can you do? What else can you show me? What other checklists can you add? So.
Right. And then how exactly to kind of mix that together with the team, so it doesn't seem like you're either, playing favorites with one or giving one person more response, kind of keeping things together. And then if you could touch on that, and then also really how you then create this team that understands that bigger vision plus their role, and have them kind of grab onto it and just go with it and become that self-directed person that once you have that, I mean, it's so helpful, because then as the owners and as the clinician, you're not always telling people or trying to feel like you have to guide them down every path. You can let them be self-directed and have their own creativity for whatever the outcome is.
Absolutely. So part of that includes the boundaries and the expectation of what the core job is. So I don't want to negate that, people come in and do like whatever they want to do. So you do have to have the fundamentals clear around what success looks like in the role that I hired you for. And then there's this percentage of creativity that you can say, and from there, you can add on. But let me come back to the first part of that, is that think of it like a relay race. So if we've got a mile relay and every person is supposed to do one leg of the relay, so I go back to those 4 quadrants that I talked about. In order for me to stay in my zone and feel like, that favoritism piece doesn't show up, is that for that leg of the relay, this is my responsibility. So I have to own that. And I also have to, when I say own it, I have to speak up for what I need. And what I need could be training, resources, it can be automation that is needed, whatever that is, a checklist, freedom to get outside of the rules, whatever those needs are. But inside of that part of the relay, I own that. Sometimes inside of a relay, somebody may have a longer leg than another person, depending on what the needs are. So if you think of it that way, I'm not playing favoritism when I'm coming to you for your section of the relay, and if it just so happens that your section's coming up repeatedly. But when I don't need that section, then I go to the next person on the leg and I pass the baton. So if I understand, if I'm in a process that needs to have ideation, that needs to have a dashboard, that needs to have a process, or it needs to be living the experience, then I know whoever is living inside of that is who I'm going to call on. And if the team understands that, and the team understands where they fit inside of that relay or that puzzle, then you immediately deflate that potential of favoritism. Does that answer that portion? So it comes back to the clarity of expectation to begin with per role.
Yeah, I love the analogy. It helps bring that point home. Yeah.
Well, and again, then you're saying to the person, right now, what I need from you is I need you to create, we've got this problem, and what are all the ways that we can possibly solve it? And then when that's done, we toss it down to the person that says, okay, Carol came up with 5 ideas. And what are the ways that we can measure this through, patient engagement, patient satisfaction, employee engagement, what have you, profitability, maybe products and services, inventories. Great.
Sure.
So those 5 ideas now got dwindled down to we can measure it 3 different ways. So we're going to take those 3 ideas. And now, Shelley, let's toss it over to you. We need a checklist. We need a process. We need a routine. And so now that's your part of the relay. And so now we had 5 ideas, 3 we can measure. Now we have 3 sets of processes and workflows. And now we give it to the front of the house team, the service agents, the service employees, to say this is how we bring it to life in the flow of when the potential patient first calls us, to when they walk in the door, to when they go through the assessment, to after they have surgery, and then we move them into maintenance. And you're making sure that you're tracking and checking them all the way. So having that defined flow, who fits in the flow is what creates, again, the stability and the dream team, because I own that part, and then I pass it to you and I back off.
Right. And the part that I own, I can kind of help create how that gets accomplished, because I own it. I love that.
I own it. Yes. And then as the practice grows, if you need more people that are on the experience side, where those experienced people are the ones that are onboarding and re-solidifying, this is what right looks like from an experience standpoint. So now you've added people into the fold of the dream team, and the accountability that you talked about, the self-guided team, lives inside of the people who created it, because we have ownership of it.
Right.
And again, I'm going to protect my baby because I created it. Right.
Right.
So
and I think the other thing that lends itself to what I've experienced personally, and you've probably seen in places, when that basis and that foundation gets set and those expectations are that way, then when an issue comes up or another frustration that may come up, it's funny how sometimes then the team starts that process even just amongst themselves and kind of starts a self-correcting or, this problem-solving methodology. And then before you know it, they're coming to you saying, you know what, we were having trouble with the flow of whatever it was, and we all kind of got together, and here's what we're proposing to do. And then that's when you really take
in the heaven and earth, you're like, oh, that lady singing, ah. No, it's definitely a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. That's when you know that you're there. That's when you know that you're like, oh my gosh. And that's the moment that you sit back, and it's the proud parent moment, proud owner moment, proud leader moment. Yeah.
And it kind of takes that stability and turns it into that self-directedness. But I love how you outlined the foundation, because a lot of teams, maybe they never functioned that way somewhere else.
Right.
And so now you teach them this new way, and you engage them in this new way of their everyday work life, and then watch it kind of bloom from there. So
yeah. And to your point, it makes it easier for each team member to hold each other accountable, because they were part of creating what right looks like. And so it's good that it's great when we do X. So then when Shelley goes rogue, the team is literally, hey, come back here. We do it this way. Because again, you've allowed them to be a part of the process and the buy-in. I'm more likely to protect something that I help birth than not.
Right. That's great. Yes. And I know a lot of times people can glaze over at the mission, vision, values. That's what, sometimes people go, oh, are we going there? I just want to get the job done. But really, I think what we've been talking about, evidence, is how important that really is, because then it'll help it's kind of like if you take the time to show someone how to do something right the first time, then you're not having to redo it all the time. But it's that investment up front that can be sort of daunting. And I love the way you simplify it.
Well, let's put it into the practice. I mean, when a patient comes to you, they've probably been there and tried that numerous different ways, numerous different times, and they're feeling lost. So they're coming to you to guide, and they want to be a part of what happened from a mental state that I got here,
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to help me fix that? And then what are you going to do along the process afterwards to help me maintain that?
Right.
So it's the very thing that your practice and the practice of the members that are with you do. So you flip. I'm suggesting to do exactly what you do for your patients.
Right.
Does that make sense? You're helping them with a mind shift. In order for them to maintain it on the back end, they have to have learned to adjust along the way, and you're helping them to learn to adjust. It's the conversation of, well, why do you think you're back to eating, cereals and crackers and cookies? What's causing that? And you got to bring them back into the root cause to help them shift back. And it's the same thing for our team members is,
right.
Why did that go awry? Why is that process that we created not working? And we have to pivot to help it work for them, just like you guys have to pivot the conversations to help it for the patient after the fact, after the surgery. How do you help them maintain it?
Sure. That's great. Yeah. And sometimes just anticipating that or expecting that will happen helps decrease levels of frustration, at least, because you're like, it's just one of those things that happens. And then, but we have a way to deal with that, and it helps keep everything a little bit smoother moving along. That's great. Any other specific tips to that stable and self-directed team before I share some specific questions that we have?
Sure. So I do want to acknowledge what you said around the mission, vision, values, that people are like, to your point on that. Again, I love the metaphors and the analogies. If we don't create, again, the guide, the plan, the foundation, the blueprint, the process to begin with, things run amok. So it's not enough to have, when you're going to build a house, all the material to show up on site. There has to be a foundation, and there has to be a blueprint of how the material is going to get together. It's the same thing for our team. We can't just say, oh, well, that practice has this role, so let me go hire for that role. Right. But then I don't know, at what point do I bring that role in? At what point do I need more people in that role?
Right.
Well, what are they going to need when I bring them in? So again, it's the same process. So my point is having the mission, vision, value, culture, philosophies, and statements, and having that alignment gives you the litmus test, gives you the foundation, gives you the structure, gives you the litmus to go back to go, are we on track? Are we secure? Are we stable? Without it, you're never going to have stability, and you're never going to have a dream team, because everybody is running amok.
Right.
So I just wanted to, I know that it's painful, but there has to be alignment and synergy. The NFL just kicked off again over the weekend. And one of my things is, does a coach go out on a playing field without a playbook? No.
Right.
So why would we go into business without what is our mission, vision, value, culture statements? Why? Because then when something happens, we're like, what do we do? Right. What are we trying to achieve? If we don't know, then we're running amok.
Right. Yeah. And if you do take the time to do that, I really do think it helps set up what you will tolerate in your culture and what you won't tolerate. So it helps have those expectations and define more of that, which helps avoid, some problems down the road. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that predictability. I know when I work with companies, we go back to that, just like you do. And it's sometimes people just don't want to spend the time, but it's so important. Yeah.
If we haven't established the why, then I understand why the questions happen. It's like, what's the value of doing that?
Right.
So we have to establish the pain point.
Right. So, and how do you recommend people incorporate that mission, vision, values into onboarding when they get someone new in?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Going back to it and saying why this is important. So if it's something around patient care, literally pulling them through, our mission is this because we have a vision of that, and our values help us get to this and eventually to that. And our culture philosophy around that is like our protective bubble. And so we hired you for this role to show up in this manner in order to help us maintain this and to get to that. So you have to draw the line in the parallel. You got to give your new hire the roadmap too.
Right.
So then when you give them feedback, when you delegate something and pull them back from an accountability and have follow-up, you literally are coming back and saying, Shelley, remember when we talked about customers care, 3 weeks ago when we onboarded you? Yeah. What did we talk about? What did we say? And pull that out into that new hire or during that onboarding process of, if we do this, how does that action draw back to customer care?
Right.
How? And in getting them to understand, see it, feel it, and manifest it. When they're doing it, they understand why they're doing it. Instead of just being robotic about it, they're leaning into the role intentionally and authentically because they understand why. And then we don't forget to do things that are on a checklist when we understand how important they are. And if we don't do them, we know what's going to happen on the back end if we miss that step. So that's critical on the onboarding.
Right. I'm going to ask you one more question about that, just because I get different questions about this. But in terms of who is the best person to be sharing what your mission, vision, and values are, I always encourage, like in our practice, I actually have the surgeon who created the entire, who created the entire business, because he can share why it was and why we do things the way we do it. And so I use the physician, but then when I work with places that have more than one office or, huge health systems, who do you typically find in various environments is the best person to share that to really make sure that it hits home with the new employee?
I love that question too. And the answer is who created it, to your point. And the bigger the practices are and the locations, that's when you move to videos. So it's the original surgeon, and now maybe there's 10 locations.
Yeah.
And now there's multiple, obviously, surgeons. So it's the message, and I'm talking quick, 15-second, 30-second clips that can be pulled together that are part of the onboarding process that can be followed up with the monthly or the quarterly live phone calls or Zoom pieces, that they see that's a real person and that it's not a fake message. It can be, if I was the surgeon and I've got 10 locations, it can be my voice to welcome you. But then I do a follow-up email piece, or it's a handwritten card piece. Those touches, regardless of how big you get, if you forget to check in and be intentional with your new team members, it absolutely gets lost along the way. The biggest company I ever worked for directly was Marriott International. And I never met, I never met Mr. Marriott, but I met all of his, well, at the time, his two sons, and then the sons' kids that were inside of the business. And Mr. Marriott Jr. coming in and doing the walks. I don't remember how many hotels there were at that time. They were massive then too. But just that the thought and the thrill of him coming in and seeing all of the things I had heard about him, and when the regional directors and the SVPs would come in, everybody walked that talk. And so I was a believer, you take care of your employees first and everything else comes in track, because I heard that, I saw it in writing, not just handbook and pictures on the wall, but every step of the way of everybody in leadership outside of my hotel walked that talk. So it starts up here and you trickle it down. You should never get so big that you're not a part of that onboarding process. So with that, it is the originator, the owner, the biggest voice in the office, if you will. But then it should also be everybody giving that message along the way, but in their voice. So for you, it's the surgeon, the original message, and then it comes down into the office manager or to yourself, and you're reiterating the part that maybe you're the most connected with.
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yep.
So
And do you generally recommend people include that in their job descriptions and performance appraisals, or some measure in
yeah,
there? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, the more you can say that a part of your role, it's like the other duties as assigned,
Hmm.
and what we mean by other duties as assigned is we'll hold everybody accountable. We will share through the experience of our core values. We will show up and make sure that our fellow team members also show up as XYZ. So absolutely. And that is something that is rarely, if ever, included in a job description, that I'm always coming back and going, let's talk about other duties as assigned. Like, how would that manifest? And let's actually unpack that a little bit. So
Right.
then the team member knows you are your brother's keeper.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I like to do sort of position contracts, but there's one standard section in each one, so it's consistent throughout with those standards.
Love
And
that.
it's just like there's no question about it. I'm held to the same standard you are, as she is, as the surgeon is, as the physician, everybody. So
I love that.
great. Are you ready for some questions?
Yeah, bring them on.
Okay. All right. These are real questions. One is from a physician in California who says, I have an employee that is great with patients. However, when I give her specific prioritized tasks, I feel at the end of the day, most are not completed. Any suggestions for improving her follow through and accountability?
Great question. Definitely a common question. And I want to try to keep it simple. It could very well be that he or she is just not on the same page. They don't, again, I have to come back to their hard wiring. Maybe they're not process driven
Hmm.
in the same manner in which you're process driven or you're hoping that they are. It could also be you giving the direction is maybe you're not clear. So with all of that being said, my first recommendation is stop and pause and give them the feedback. Go, hey, listen, XYZ, when you do your day-to-day functions are great, but I've noticed that anytime that I give you specific list of things to get done, more often than not, they're not getting done. So let's just talk about why they're not getting done. And again, you got to unpack it. You got to get to the root cause. Is it that I wasn't clear when I delegated? Is it that when I delegated, I didn't come back and say, Shelley, what did you hear? Is
Hmm.
it that I delegated and I came back and said, Shelley, what is it that you hear that I didn't come back along the way to make sure that you got everything that you needed? Do I need to support you and check in with you throughout the day? Do I need to look at what's on your list and help you prioritize it?
Hmm.
Or do you want to come back and say, I've got these 3 things. I'm going to do them in this order. I'll call you if I need you. But do I have that conversation with you deliberately up front to make sure we're on the same page? So often employees come back and go, I didn't know that. I
Hmm.
didn't know you wanted it in that order. Well, I didn't know that's what you meant by that. Or, oh, I didn't know you meant you wanted that done today. Or you've never shown me how to do that, right? It's like all of those things. So stop and ask, why are we not able to do it? Let's come up with a game plan. Let's get on the same page. Let's try that out. And
Hmm.
then let's come back and talk about, did it work? Did it not? Where do we need to pivot? So you got to go back, call it out, find out what's wrong.
I love that. I love also she just like gets right to the point. So, but in a nice way. So I love that. Yeah. And sometimes we avoid those conversations for whatever reason, time and, conflict.
More often than not, people don't like to, accountability is a 4-letter word. And the reason why it's uncomfortable to delegate and hold others accountable is usually because we're not clear on the expectation. And sometimes we're not even clear ourselves. We like rattle off, can you do this, this, and this? Or, hey, here's a list of things to do. And we haven't even thought through it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we kind of have to sometimes, pull back and have accountability on ourselves and then to move forward. But
Right.
that's why it's not comfortable holding people accountable, because
Mhm.
sometimes we're not clear on the expectation ourselves.
Excellent. All right. This is a question coming from a physician in Nevada. I run a solo independent practice. Sometimes I feel as if I'm putting out fires all day long and have to micromanage a bit. What's the best way to put an end to this so that I can focus more on patient care?
Ooh, it's a good one. It's the cook that gets into owning a restaurant because they love to cook. And now all of a sudden they're doing everything but cooking. So it sounds like it's the love of the patient care that got into the practice, but now they're doing everything but that. So I'm going to talk from an experience standpoint in my business, because definitely the same thing happened to me, is that I found that I was doing far more administrative things that sucked the very life out of me instead of being able to just, have a conversation and get in and help a client. And so what I started doing, and now I teach this to my clients as well, is the first thing I did is I went back and I started blocking my time to understand how I was spending my time. So I could begin to justify, well, if I want to spend more time with my patients, that I'm getting pulled off on firefighting of this, and that, how do I swing the pendulum? Number one, I need to understand how am I spending my time and why. It could be that I haven't trained and delegated and set expectations. That could be it, and that's why I'm always in firefighting mode. It could be that I'm just doing functions that I really just need to go ahead and hire somebody else to do them, because if I hire outright, then I'm able to spend time here. And when I spend time here, I'm able to pay for hiring outright, which is what I found for myself, which is the first thing that I let go of was the bookkeeping piece, for example. I was spending so much time on that. And then I started letting go of administrative things. But I will say, when I let go of administrative things, I found myself firefighting because I wasn't clear on what I wanted, when I wanted it, and how I wanted it. And so again, I had to pull myself back into that problem. I was the root cause to be able to, so I had to go deep down in order to come back up to look at it, in order to let go of it. So those would be the things: is how are you spending your time? Is that how you want to spend your time? Specific firefighting is listing what's the firefighting over. So if your team members are coming to you and you always feel like you're solving problems, it means that you are unintentionally, you're a control freak, and you got to figure out how to let go, right? Yeah. And in order to figure out how to let go, it means you've got to have trust in your team. So you've got to figure out how to stop and recreate that trust. Right. So there's unfortunately, there's not an easy solution to that question, but the very first thing you have to do is stop and figure out, what am I firefighting on and how am I spending my time? And then when am I willing to begin to change? Right.
I love that. And in fact, you touched on something we're not going to get into today because it's a whole other podcast. I'm going to have you back on for, but that's how to hire right. You said that very, very specifically. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of people, but we'll save that for another podcast. But how to hire right that's good. Because if you do, you save yourself a lot of time and money, huh?
You sure do. Hire right and onboard right.
Yeah. That's going to be great. Okay, one more here. This is from someone in New York. I love my team. However, I have one employee who's a great clinician, but tends to bring the team down with her negativity and complaining. Any suggestions to help improve the situation?
Yeah. It's always so sad when we've got somebody who's highly effective in their role, but man, they suck the energy out of the rest of the team. It's heartbreaking when you hear that, because what we're talking about here is intangible, it's behavioral, it's impressions of others, perceptions of others. Those are tough conversations, but you got to have them. And I'm going to go back to how they're onboarded with what does, in this instance, being a team member look like. What do we do? What do we say? What do we not say? What do we not do? What are those expectations of proper team collaboration? And then when people are getting off track, you're coming back to them with examples of, hey, listen, Shelley, Carol just came to me and you guys had a conversation that Carol's kind of upset about. Can we talk about that, you and I? And then I've already gotten Carol's permission. Let's all sit down and talk about that, because Shelley, I know that's not what you meant, but again, you and I have talked about this. You're coming off to, curt, direct, blunt, whatever with your team members, and they you're a little intimidating at times. I mean, that's kind of like a common thing when people get the reaction to that question that you just had. So you got to come back to what's right and what's not right, and what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. And I want to acknowledge, I know it's hard in a tough labor market to begin with, to find people who can execute the functions of the job, but you can teach other people functions. You cannot teach people who are not hardwired human to human respect and relationship and collaboration. And when that isn't in sync with your team, the cost to your business is tremendous. Mm-hmm. Because if you want to have a stable, self-guided, highly effective dream team, you're not going to have it when one cog is constantly causing drama. You're never, ever, ever going to have it. And you're going to find all of your time is attracted trying to get that person back on, trying to get that person back on. And then you become stressed and anxious and frustrated. And it's exhausting. And it is so costly.
Oh, I've lived that. I totally agree. And the sooner you deal with it,
the better
off you're going to be, just like you said, because of the time, the cost, and just the whole frustration that it causes. I was so glad that question came in, because I think that is really, I mean, probably every person who's listening to this podcast, and you and I alike, we can all think of a situation where that was happening and what it felt like.
Yeah, it sucks the life out of you and everybody on the team, and quite frankly, those that come into either your stores to get products, mm-hmm. or to come in as a new client, or they start to feel the vibe between your team members too, and so that becomes an additional layer that can be costly as well. So, yeah.
I hope it's getting better, but I think even in the field of nursing, I mean, there's plenty of articles out there about how we eat our young. I mean, it's just this insidious thing that sometimes can get out of hand, and you've got to keep a grip on it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I would love to have any other parting thoughts and how people can reach out to you and learn more about what you do.
Sure. Well, again, I appreciate being on today. Great questions. You know, nothing in business is easy. If it was easy, there wouldn't be so many books and guides and whatnot on it. So, you know, my parting words would be: start simple, look at your foundations, always go back to the root cause. When you've got a list of more reactive things that are on your plate per day, then you need to stop the madness, because if not, you're just a hamster on a wheel and you're not going to get anywhere. So the only way to stop is, number one, acknowledge that there is an opportunity. I'm not saying that it's a hot mess, but an opportunity. And then stop and unpack it. You know, it's like when you have something that is, you know, all mangled up. If you want to use it again, you have to stop calmly and unravel it, and then you can get restarted. So just keep it simple. So to contact me, I'm on every social media platform to man that I think exists out there, and you can always do just at Premier Rapport, and that's PREMIER RAPPORT. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter, and of course the website. And then the membership platform that I have actually helps people do all these things that we talked about, and it starts with the creation of the culture playbook pages that define what right looks like.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And you can find that also at premierrapport.com, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I've seen Shelley in action. It's pretty cool. We've actually used her in our practice too before, with some predictive index, which was really insightful. So always good at bringing it home and helping things improve. So without further ado, I'm going to let Shelley get back to her business, and we're going to call this a wrap. And until our podcast next week, I hope everyone takes care and continues to do all the awesome things you're doing for all those people in your community. Take care.